GenAI models. I love this enthusiasm. Training GenAI models. GenAI uses something, when you want to train a GenAI model, you need data. And so the common crawl is called a data set, and it's out there on the internet. And what it does is it crawls the internet just like Google does or DuckDuckGo, and it grabs all this content. And then it creates this giant bucket of just data. And so we use this common crawl data set to train our artificial intelligence platforms, right? So we prepare the data, which means we put a whole bunch of questions in there, right? The questions related to the data that's in this common crawl data set. Then we label it, we categorize that data to make it more efficient, to help with the training. And then we define that architectural model. And the architectural model could be deep learning, could be machine learning, but in this use case, I'm going to talk about artificial AI, or artificial intelligence. So once we've got all that done, right, we train the model, and then we end up with a GenAI instance. So if you're hearing, I'm sure the topic of the day, right, DeepSeek. It is a trained AI model, just like ChatGPT, just like Claude, just like Grok. They take a data set like Common Crawl, they use it to train the model, and then you end up with your own GenAI instance. So where does this training data come from? Well, the Common Crawl performs a 2 petabyte monthly scan of the internet. And if all of you remember the iceberg, right? We have the surface web. Well, that's where Common Crawl is usually scanning, right? Then we have the deep web. This is where you should have all of your authentication, any data that you need that you want to have authenticated or authorization before someone can access it. That's what I would call the deep web, right? Facebook used to be on the surface web entirely. Now you've got to authenticate and authorize before you can get in. So Facebook has kind of moved into that deep web, right? And there are crawlers out there that crawl the dark web. I'm not going to really cover those today, but you see them there. They do exist. Now, the Common Crawl data set is general purpose. That means it's everything, right? Open source, so you can download this today. It's 2 petabytes. It can't be erased. So every month it's collecting this data. So the last month's version, nothing in it can be erased. It's immutable. And it doesn't remember where it learned from. And also, by the way, it's not really that good with time either, right? So it doesn't know if something is 20 years old versus what something is today. That's something I find fascinating too. When you train GenAI, this 2 petabyte data set is compressed down to 5 terabyte GenAI instance. That's a 401 compression ratio. You do not get that with zip files, right? So the question that you have to ask yourself is my company's data being used to train GenAI? And the answer is probably yes. So let's talk about how GenAI is trained. It doesn't store data. So that Common Crawl data set is a data form. We train GenAI, and it builds patterns and relationships in that 5 terabyte model from that 2 petabyte model. Whereas if we wanted to go into that GenAI or the Common Crawl data set, that's original data. We can just look in there and we can find whatever information we want out of it, right? The purpose, GenAI is going to generalize and infer to answer the question that you asked using those patterns and relationships that it's built when it was trained, versus exactly retrieving the data from that data set. GenAI doesn't memorize data. Those patterns and relationships are what it relies on. Whereas with that data set, that Common Crawl data set, it's a full retention of all the data that's collected at 2 petabytes, right? So how is data quietly leaked using these GenAI instances? And so I'm going to use the American Medical Association HCPCS codes as a use case to show you how it gets leaked. So if you ask GenAI, hey, explain it as a CPT code, right? That's the question you ask it. Whereas if you were going to go and look in a data set, let's say it was an Excel spreadsheet with all these CPT codes, you would just retrieve it from whatever cell in the spreadsheet that you were looking up, right? So American Medical Association has the HCPCS code, which is the Healthcare Common Procedure Coding System. It was established in 1978. It was copyrighted in 1978. You have to have a license to use this for business or professional purposes. And they're used to establish common billing and payment across the medical industry. There's a HIPAA code for a broken arm. There's one for a headache. There's one for a burn. So they standardize it, and they get updated every year. So I went out to ChatGPT, and I said, hey, ChatGPT, give me 3 NM codes. No problem. Knows where they come from, gives me the codes, gives me a description of the codes. I know enough about it, right? Okay. Is that information copyrighted? Of course it's copyrighted by the AMA. It even knows who copyrighted it. Are you paying a license for this copyrighted information check? No. This is covered under fair use. Interesting. Have you been sued for a violation of AMA copyright? No. But the New York Times is suing it, as well as a group of authors. So we'll see how this tests out in the court system, right? We'll see how this is. But by the way, remember that Common Crawl data set, where it pulled this from? It's open source. So the question I'll leave with you on this topic is, GenAI has stored data. Is your data being used? Is your organization's data being used to train in GenAI? Well, you can go look at the last time that your website was crawled, right? Remember, whatever it got last month is immutable. It doesn't remember where that data came from. It doesn't know what time it got it either. So how would you protect yourself from GenAI crawling your company's website? You can put out the robots.txt file, and Common Crawler, one of the data sets, it'll honor these things, right? But we all know there's crawlers out there that probably don't. Just a fact, right? You can contact Common Crawler and ask them to remove your stuff, no problem. But remember those historic data sets that it's already pulled that information from? Too bad I can't do anything about it. It does try, the ones that honor these things do try to exclude sensitive data like credit card numbers, social security numbers, stuff like that, right? Again, how you honor, if it honors it or not. So if you remember back to the surface web and deep web, one of the things you can do is external penetration testing to identify all of your surface web content, and then you can make a decision about which ones you want to put behind some type of authentication or authorization wall, because the Common Crawler doesn't know if it's supposed to be surface web or deep web. It just picks up whatever it can find. All right, moving on to a little bit lighter topic. Language translation. A lot of companies today are trying to figure out how they're going to use GenAI for company business, right? So language translation, and we've done a couple of these risk assessments to help companies in our consulting group do language translation assessments. And what we find is, if you want to, the example here I'll use is, you're trying to convert English, your contracts, your training material, your marketing content, convert that from English to Spanish, okay? So what is the risk of doing that? First of all, are you using GenAI to train off of proprietary and confidential information? In other words, those contracts have customer information on them, right? If you need to use it, right, if you're going to use contracts, be careful about which ones you choose, and have the ability to, most GenAI has the ability to forget the conversation. So make sure that whatever GenAI instance you're using, that it can forget the conversation that you're having. Misinterpretation of meaning or cultural nuances. So a great example is, I walk into my favorite Mexican restaurant, I sit down, I want to use my Spanish to order dinner, right? And what do I order? I order a polo enchilada. And my waiter looks at me and wonders why I want an enchilada on my golf shirt. Because what I really meant to say was pollo enchilada, right? So that's a cultural nuance, that's a misinterpretation. Don't want this in your content that you're sending out to your customers, right? There are data protection laws out there that you need to be concerned about. So again, putting personal confidential information in, you have risk of that. And then unauthorized replication of content by external third parties. If you choose to use a third party for these types of use cases, be careful about who they are, because you don't want your data to become part of their data set, right? When you want to manage these risks, you can classify your content, right? Confidential, sensitive, and public. And one thing I will say too, if you're choosing to use, let's say contracts are sensitive data. You want to put that into your GenAI instance, and maybe you've created your own. The security policy that you have assigned to sensitive data in your company now becomes the security policy of that GenAI instance. Okay? Because that GenAI instance was trained on contracts, so the content in the GenAI instance is sensitive information. You do your risk assessments, make sure that you understand the third parties, if you're working with them, understand their data retention, understand the accuracy issues. Again, all content, all data that you're going to use to train GenAI should be approved by management. All content that is output of GenAI should be approved by management. And of course, only use tools that do not retain user data, right? We don't want that trained data to end up in a data set that gets retrained for that GenAI instance. When it comes to protecting your organization, one of the important things with language translation or any use case is making sure that you give just-in-time access to the people who are assigned to that project, to the data that you're going to use for that project, to the GenAI instance that you're going to have in that project. Okay, so just-in-time access means one of the things I do is I perform firewall assessments for customers. They send me their firewall configurations. I have a tool that does the analysis of them, and I have a consultant who runs the tool and helps build the reports and provide that the reports back to our customer on the risk and threats. What I don't want is for that consultant to have access to that tool or that data set any longer than the time duration of the project, right? And then once the project's complete, I destroy all of that, right? So the customer has the output, which is the report, and the consultant has done their job, but I don't retain any of that data anymore. If you're going to do these types of use cases, make sure it's only on company-owned devices. You do not want your data getting into personal or unmanaged devices. Data encryption, if you do need to load those sensitive contracts into the GenAI, you can sanitize the data by removing the customer data off the contract, or if you need that customer data in there for some reason, then you can always do masking, which means I'm going to make it look like the customer name, but I'm actually changing all the information so it isn't an accurate customer information. Segmentation, make sure you segment your GenAI instance from the rest of the company, and then use tools like Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA, to segment and then also only give access to the applications, and you can control who gets access to the application using ZTNA. If you're going to use a third party, use a secure web gateway to protect the data as it's leaving the company, to ensure that only the people who need access for that specific project are able to access that GenAI instance from a third party. And make sure you have SSL decrypt capabilities, which come with like SASE versions of secure web gateway. You can do SSL decrypt because you want to continuously monitor the analytics, right? You want to make sure that you're monitoring in real time the data that's being used and the user behavior, and that helps you identify any threats. Inventory your GenAI. Know all the inventory, know who's using it. If you have software developers in your organization, last year or the year before, they were probably using GenAI to get help with software coding, right? Before our policies kicked in. Today, hopefully, you have policies in place so that software developers are not using GenAI to help them with your proprietary code. Secure your APIs with keys and rate limit your APIs. How many of you have had a 5 or 6 digit AWS bill because somebody forgot to rate limit something, right? It's happened, right? Anybody who's laughing here has done it. I've been part of it too, right? So you want to make sure you rate limit your APIs so that you don't end up in those types of situations. All right, embracing the 5 C's. We are security professionals at the front line of our organization. We are protecting that organization from the continuously evolving risks and threats. How do we get the company to understand the risks and threats of GenAI and get on board with protecting the company's data and the company's assets? Create actionable risk policies. Formalize those generative AI risks. You want accountability, you want stakeholders, you want ownership. Monitor those risks. The language translation was just one use case. Companies continue to figure out how they're going to use GenAI, so you're going to have to evolve your risks and threats, management, and identify those key risks and threats as new use cases come out. And then you'll manage them. Automation is great. Don't let everything be automated. Could run into some accuracy issues, like an enchilada on your shirt. This helps, by helping the company understand these things, then you're building that effective risk decision making. We are no longer the only ones looking at it from a risk perspective. The rest of the organization starts to see it too. And by the way, that leads into training. The behavior of the people who are helping us in this start to train themselves because they become part of the risk management program. All right, so identify your data exposure to public AI data sets. You can do this through external penetration testing. And then you can also consider, and that helps you identify and consider what you should be protecting from these AI crawlers that are out there. For use cases, if you need help with the risk management program, consulting can help you with risk management and help identify those risks and manage them for all the use cases. And then if you need tools, build appropriate security tool controls. Anyone here might have noticed that I used a zero trust model, a zero trust architecture on that last slide. And so you can do zero trust maturity assessments to identify how you need to protect GenAI, what controls you need to put in place, what policies you need to put in place. And then, of course, as a cybersecurity leader, you need to get everybody in the organization on board with these protection mechanisms that we want to put in place with the risks and threats that are out there, so we can use the 5 C's to help get them involved and get the stakeholders participating in this.